Emerald lightning tore across the sky. It wasn't just a storm. It was the dying breath of a world on the brink. On the hostile planet of Veridia, beneath the glow of bioluminescent trees and the acidic mist, the Curillians, an ancient race born of root and rain, had retreated to their final sanctuary. The Root Heart. Once stewards of a wild and wondrous jungle, they were now hunted, cornered, and forgotten. Their enemy, the Veer, part machine, part nightmare. They didn't want land. They didn't come to conquer. They came only to erase. Inside the sanctum, as the last protective barriers flickered and fell, Elder Zyra gave the unthinkable command. Begin the Song of Passage. A ritual reserved for extinction. Because no one had answered their cries for help. But just as the last embers of hope dimmed, the sky cracked open. And from the storm, they fell. Black pods. Silent descent. No banners. Only a single crimson emblem. The Nightingale. They came from Earth. Uninvited. Undetected. Because of a debt, long owed. Earth remembered. And in the mud and fire of that final battlefield, one moment would change everything. As the Veer's apex warbeast charged toward Elder Zyra, ready to strike the final blow, a human stepped in its path. Sergeant Jax, once a boy who had crash-landed on Veridia, once saved by Curillian hands, now stood between his past and its end. With no time to think, he threw himself into the attack. Blood met steel. Flesh met fate. Your people saved mine, he whispered. Today, I return the favor. And in that storm, in the heart of a jungle no one dared to remember, something eternal was spoken without words. We were not forgotten. We were remembered. The air shimmered with tension. Inside the living heart of the ancient tree, the Root Heart sanctum, bioluminescent veins pulsed faintly along the bark walls, casting soft blue-green hues across the chamber. Each pulse, once steady and calm, now flickered unevenly like a heartbeat slipping into chaos. Elder Zyra moved through the dim chamber with slow, graceful steps. Though age had dulled the luster of her chitin plates, she carried herself with a dignity carved by centuries. Her eyes, wide and faceted, reflected the glow of failing biolights around her. Patterns etched into her armored body told stories of generations past, memories now threatened with oblivion. Outside, the storm screamed through the jungle of Veridia. Lightning green and unnatural slashed across the sky, illuminating twisted branches and towering fungal blooms. Acidic rain hissed as it fell, eating through leaves and pooling in toxic puddles on the jungle floor. The storm had lasted for days. It was not natural. It was brought by the Veer. A low, rhythmic hum vibrated through the walls. The sanctuary was alive, ancient, and afraid. Kale, young and restless, burst into the chamber, rain still clinging to his iridescent exoskeleton. The eastern perimeter, it's gone, he said, his voice tight. 3 more defenders lost. The Veer, they're using sonic pulses now. Our fungal barriers melt before contact. Zyra didn't flinch. She barely moved. Only her inner eyelids closed briefly, a silent, sacred moment of grief. Have we countered it? She asked. No, Kale admitted. The spore grenades slow them, but their filters adapt too fast. All around them, Curillian workers moved with frantic purpose, tending to living conduits, adjusting energy flows, pouring nutrient gel into failing root nodes. Their technology was organic, grown rather than built, and now, that living system was collapsing. On the far wall, a sprawling membrane flickered the shield display. A visual echo of the energy barrier that protected them. It was pulsing erratically. Dying. Kale lowered his voice. We are the last, Elder. If the drill reaches the heartwood. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Zyra turned and gestured silently. Kale followed her up a spiraling platform made of woven vine and bone. It led to an opening carved into the tree's inner wall, concealed from the outside world. There, through the sheeted rain, the Veer were visible. Like metal nightmares born of insect and serpent, they moved in cold precision, cybernetic monstrosities tearing through the jungle. Where they stepped, life died. Chemical clouds reduced centuries of growth into bubbling waste. Their sonic machines shattered roots beneath the soil. They harvested nothing. They left behind only destruction. Zyra's voice was barely above a whisper. They do not even harvest what they kill, they simply erase. And then, a new sound. A low, resonant thudding of vibration that passed not just through the floor, but through the air, the blood, the soul. Kale stiffened. Atmosphere drill. Northwest quadrant. Another Curillian, trembling, approached. The energy, it's the largest drill signature we've seen. They're targeting the root heart itself. Zyra's lids closed again. Not in fear. In decision. The final shield will not hold, the technician added. 2 hours, maybe less. Zyra turned toward the central altar, where a glowing seed pod rested within the tangled root throne. Have we received any response? She asked. No one answered. For months, they had sent distress signals to the stars. Across frequencies, across spectrums. But the galaxy had remained silent. Perhaps they were unheard. Or perhaps, no one cared. Zyra exhaled slowly, her voice calm and final. Begin the song of passage. Kale hesitated. Elder, that song is for. I know, Zyra interrupted gently. But if we are to join our ancestors, let the stars at least remember we were here. The technician bowed deeply and departed. And somewhere deep in the sanctum, the ancient harmonic nodes stirred, awakening for what might be the last time. Above the clouds of Veridia, beyond the reach of lightning and acid rain, a vessel hung in orbit, cloaked in silence. The silent vigil, Earth's ghost ship. Its hull was black as the void, designed to absorb all signals, all light, all trace of its presence. Around it, a small fleet of stealth frigates waited like wolves in the shadows. Inside, the air was still. Lights dimmed. No alarms. Only purpose. In the command chamber, Admiral Thorne stood alone. He was not a man of many words. His uniform bore no decorations, only a single crimson pin on the collar, a nightingale. Almost invisible. And very old. A soft tone chimed. A secured link opened. Major Petrova appeared on the holo display, her face lit by the glow of tactical maps. Short dark hair. Scars across her jaw. Eyes that held the weight of war. She wore the matte black armor of Earth's elite, the Reapers. No flags. No name tags. Only function. Major, Thorn began without pleasantries. Project Nightingale is now active. Petrova straightened slightly. Objective: enforce Life Debt Protocol, Omega. Neutralize all Veer forces threatening the indigenous population of Veridia. Standard engagement rules, suspended. There was a beat of silence. Just long enough for the order to settle like dust. Understood, Admiral, she replied, her voice steady. Reaper teams are prepped. Drop window, 20 minutes. Synchronize with next atmospheric surge. We'll provide orbital support once ground teams confirm contact. She nodded. Extraction plan. Same as insertion, Thorn said. Fast. Clean. No trace. The Veer must believe this was a mistake they will never repeat. His voice dropped slightly. Is Sergeant Jax on your team? Yes, sir. He requested this mission the moment parameters were finalized. Thorn's gaze lingered on the hologram. Good. He has more right to be there than any of us. He ended the call with a simple gesture. Behind him, officers moved with silent efficiency. No one asked questions. No one needed to. Navigation, Thorn said quietly. Bring us into position. Weapons, he added. Stand by for precision strikes on my mark. In the deployment bay, below the command deck, the Reapers prepared. Dozens of elite soldiers in black armor moved like shadows among the racks and launch systems. No shouting. No panic. Only routine. Sergeant Jax sat alone, checking his gear for the third time. Everything was ready. But the ritual grounded him. Centered him. He adjusted the neural link in his helmet, feeling it sync with his thoughts. As it hummed online, a memory surfaced uninvited and sharp. The feeling of burning on his skin. The smell of alien moss. The cool touch of a clawed, gentle hand applying salve to his wounds. The soft clicking sounds, language he hadn't understood, but somehow, still heard. He had been 10 years old. A child left behind in a war not his. A Curillian had saved his life, long ago. Now, he had returned not to settle a score, but to repay a promise. His squad leader approached, breaking the silence. 2 minutes to drop. You good? Jax stood, fastening his helmet into place. Never better, he said, calm. Time to pay old debts. The hull of the silent vigil groaned softly as it adjusted position. Outside the launch bay, clouds churned. Lightning danced in emerald threads. Below, Veridia waited dying. Inside the pods, Reapers strapped themselves in. Black armor gleamed under red launch lights. Screens flickered with weather data, shield interference, terrain overlays. Deployment in 5, came the countdown across the neural link. 4, 3, 2, 1. A hiss. A thud. Then silence. The drop pods launched like stones into the storm, vanishing into the green, war-torn skies of Veridia. The sky was a screaming green inferno. Lightning twisted across the clouds like veins of glowing emerald. The drop pods fell silently through the atmosphere, their matte black hulls cutting clean lines through the storm. Inside one pod, Sergeant Jax sat still, his eyes closed. He felt the shudder of gravity pulling them down, the heat building on the outer shell. The others in his pod said nothing. No one ever spoke during descent. The ritual was silence. Focus. Breath. But inside his mind, another world stirred. He was 10 again. A younger Jax stood alone in the jungle, skin burned, armor cracked and useless. His face was blistered from chemical rain. His limbs shook from hunger. He had no weapon. No way to call for help. Just his broken breathing, and the endless, glowing jungle watching him. And then they came. Not the Veer. The Curillians. He remembered the first one, towering and strange, its carapace glowing faintly blue under the misty light. Its limbs moved in a gentle rhythm. Its eyes, multifaceted and endless, blinked softly as it knelt beside him. It had not spoken words he could understand. Only soft clicks. Rhythmic vibrations. But its hands were careful, patient, kind. It cleaned his wounds with a salve that smelled like wet moss and pine. It gave him water that shimmered in the air like liquid stars. It did not ask where he was from. It did not ask why he was there. It simply helped. He had survived because of that alien stranger. He had lived, when there was no reason he should have. And that memory had followed him for 25 years. Back in the present inside the drop pod, Jax opened his eyes. The green flashes outside painted sharp shadows across his visor. The altimeter ticked down rapidly. They were close. He looked to the seat beside him. 2 other Reapers. One was checking their rifles' power levels. The other whispered a prayer, silent, lips moving behind the faceplate. 1 minute, came the voice over the neural link. Jax flexed his fingers over his rifle. Then, slowly, reached down to his belt pouch and removed a small, round object. A seed pod, dark brown, polished smooth, carved with delicate patterns in spirals and symbols only he could recognize. It had been a gift. Left for him by the one who saved him, before he was rescued by a Terran patrol. He kept it with him always. Not for luck, but for memory. He turned it in his gloved fingers, just once, then returned it to his pouch. 30 seconds. His breathing slowed. His heartbeat steadied. No fear. Not this time. This time, he came with purpose. This time, he came to stand for them. The pod trembled. The storm howled. The jungle rose beneath them, unforgiving, sacred, and alive. Brace for impact. And then contact. The pods hit like shadows from the sky. Silent. Deadly. Unseen. The jungle did not scream. It held its breath. High above, the clouds split open, green lightning tracing wild lines through the sky. And then, they came. Black pods, sleek and silent, pierced the storm canopy like falling daggers. They moved without sound. No engines. No flame. Only gravity and precision. They struck the jungle floor with surgical accuracy, slamming into clearings, ridges, and flanking positions with brutal grace. And for a moment, everything went still. Then the pods opened. With a soft hiss, the hulls peeled back. From within, shadows moved. Figures in matte black armor, their edges blurred by adaptive cloaking plates. Their visors glowed faintly red, but only for a second, then vanished into the ambient light. The Reapers had landed. They moved like ghosts, silent, fast, perfect. One by one, teams emerged from the jungle undergrowth, spreading in waves of controlled motion. Each step measured. Each target scanned. Each breath synchronized through the neural net that bound them together. Their weapons didn't flash or roar. They whispered. Sonic disruptors, calibrated precisely to Veer frequencies, cracked through the air with no echo. EMP shells burst in pale blue pulses, shutting down Veer cybernetics in mid-step. Projectile rounds carried acidic cores, designed to eat through armor from the inside out. The Veer didn't see it coming. Their units, still focused on the Curillian sanctuary, were caught in staggered formations, unprepared for assault from above. In one clearing, a Veer patrol was torn apart in seconds. The Reapers moved in perfect tandem, one suppressing, one flanking, one finishing. The jungle lit with quick bursts of light, then returned to darkness. Silent. Deadly. In a command pod, Major Petrova stepped out last. Rain hissed down her armor. She didn't flinch. Alpha Team, secure the drill site, she said through the neural channel. Bravo, establish perimeter east of the sanctuary. Charlie and Delta, you're with me. We push through their flank. Full engagement protocols. Her voice was flat. Calm. The voice of a soldier who had seen too many wars and knew exactly how this one would end. She raised her weapon, a compact rifle with a glowing coil down its spine. Let's show them Earth remembers. Elsewhere, Sergeant Jax and his fire team moved through the dripping jungle. His boots sank into bioluminescent mud. Massive leaves bent under the weight of falling rain. The trees here were wide as bunkers, with twisting roots like walls. Around him, his team advanced in low stances, visors scanning, fingers resting on triggers. A Veer drone appeared, its compound eyes glinting in the green light. Before it could raise its weapon, a Reaper shot a sonic pulse directly at its head. The drone dropped, spasming as its cybernetics shorted out. Another tried to retreat. Jax's teammate dropped it with a clean, quiet shot through its torso. There were no screams. Only the sound of wet soil, and falling machines. High above, the silent vigil drifted silently in orbit. Admiral Thorne stood before a massive display of battlefield telemetry. Dots blinked across a map of Veridia Reaper positions, Veer concentrations, energy spikes. He watched calmly as the human forces pushed deeper, as the Veer began to falter. Target their communications, he instructed his weapons officer. Blind them. Isolate them. Break their cohesion. The officer nodded. Satellites deployed electronic warfare payloads into the atmosphere, scrambling the Veer's ability to coordinate. Orders became echoes. Alerts became static. And into that confusion, the Reapers advanced. Back in the jungle, the Curillians had not yet seen the newcomers. They only knew the Veer had stopped advancing. That something had changed. From their sanctuary walls, they watched strange black shapes move through the storm with terrifying speed, too fast, too precise to be animals. Not Veer. Not their kind. Kale pressed his face to a viewing port. What are they? He whispered. Behind him, Zyra remained still, her antennae slowly rising. She didn't speak. Not yet. But in the green shimmer of the storm, She sensed something had arrived. Not gods. Not monsters. Something in between. The jungle began to change. Where moments ago there had been relentless Veer assault, relentless precision, mechanical waves, scorched earth, now there was confusion. The Veer units stopped moving in unison. Their formations broke apart. Some began spinning erratically. Others fired at empty air, at shadows that weren't there. Their internal networks were fracturing. Inside the root heart sanctum, Kale watched the monitors, his eyes wide. They're misfiring. Their signals are collapsing. Look, units are disengaging. He tapped the living control membrane, pulling up proximity feeds. Veer positions were blinking out one by one. Zyra leaned closer. They're not retreating, she murmured. They're being erased. Then came the rumble. Not the drill. Not thunder. Something else. Boom. 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 Heavy, muffled detonations, distant but drawing closer. The ground shook. Leaves trembled. The root heart groaned. Kale turned to Zyra, stunned. What is this? Before she could answer, the sky itself tore open. At the Veer drill site, Apex Unit 7, a towering fusion of flesh and alloy, stood still. Its eyes scanned the battlefield. What it saw made no sense. Stealth anomalies. Movement patterns that defied physics. Sensor ghosts appearing, vanishing. Heat signatures rising and falling too fast to track. Orbital command, respond, Apex transmitted. Possible atmospheric countermeasures. Request elevation scan. But only static replied. The orbit was jammed. And then they came. From the storm clouds above, dark shapes dropped in silence. At first, the Veer mistook them for debris. Fallen wreckage. Maybe animals. But when they landed, and the pods split open, the Reapers emerged. Their armor absorbed the light. Their movements were impossibly fast. Each soldier glided through the battlefield like living shadows, weapons adapted perfectly to the Veer. EMP pulses collapsed cybernetic limbs. Sonic bursts shattered exoskeletons from the inside. Acidic projectiles melted armor like butter under flame. The Reapers had studied the Veer. And now, they unmade them. Major Petrova led from the front. Her rifle pulsed with low, glowing light, firing calibrated plasma rounds that struck with surgical precision. Bravo, flank left. Delta, push north, and sever retreat routes. No prisoners. No survivors. Keep pressure constant. Her voice echoed in every Reaper's neural link. Behind her, explosions lit the rain-drenched jungle. Flesh and steel fell together. Veer drones screamed as their circuits shorted out mid-strike. A Veer heavy unit fired a cannon into the mist. Nothing. Then its head was torn off by a monomolecular blade thrown from the trees. Another drone turned only to be dragged into the mud by a silent Reaper, disappearing without a sound. At the sanctuary's outer wall, the Curillians watched the impossible unfold. Black armored figures, humans, though they could hardly believe it, were fighting back. Not with desperation, but with purpose. With strategy. With vengeance. Kale gripped the viewing vines, eyes full of stunned awe. They fight like the Veer do, he whispered. Zyra stepped forward. Her voice was quiet, but it rang through the sanctum. No. They fight better. Inside the Reaper's neural network, Sergeant Jax relayed his squad's movements. We've cleared the South Ridge. Moving on to intercept flank units. He ducked behind a fallen log, rain splattering across his visor. Around him, trees burned with chemical fire. The air stank of melted plastic and scorched bark. His HUD flashed enemy movement ahead. Contact. 5 Veer. Approach pattern erratic. Likely damaged units. Jax made a motion with 2 fingers. His team spread into formation. They opened fire as one. The Veer dropped in unison 3 seconds, no words. Jax stepped over one of the bodies. It was still twitching, eyes glowing dimly. He raised his rifle and ended it clean. Far above, aboard the silent Vigil, Admiral Thorn watched from orbit. Mark Veer ground forces at 60% eliminated. His tactical officer nodded. They're collapsing faster than projected, sir. Thorn's voice was low. They expected silence. They got Earth. He turned to the weapons station. Begin orbital jamming of all Veer fleet transmissions. Scramble their reinforcements. Cut them off. Let them die alone. The officer hesitated. Sir, what about diplomacy? Interstellar law. Thorn didn't blink. They broke it when they started this war. We're just making sure they remember how it ends. And in the green-lit shadows of Veridia, the jungle roared to life, lit by storm, fire, and the fury of Earth's return. The jungle steamed. Rain hissed down over burning roots and shattered machines. The battle still echoed in the distance, muffled explosions, pulses of strange light, bursts of static across the sky. But here, at the outer edge of the sanctuary, a different kind of silence was taking hold. Sergeant Jax and his team emerged from the undergrowth, black figures moving carefully, deliberately. Their armor was streaked with mud and Veer blood. Their weapons low, but ready. They had pushed deep into Curillian territory, fighting, not for conquest, but for protection. Now, they stood at the edge of something far older than themselves. The root heart loomed before them, half-living structure, half-temple. Its walls pulsed with bioluminescent veins, glowing faintly in the mist. From within, the faint hum of ancient song still vibrated, soft, sacred, and full of sorrow. Suddenly movement. Curillians appeared. A group of warriors stepped into view, led by Kale. Their bodies gleamed with iridescent armor. Their weapons, biolances, organic and deadly, were raised. They had seen the Reapers from afar, but now, face to face, they paused. Kale's antennae twitched. His stance was uncertain. Fear battled instinct. Were these figures, friend, or another kind of conqueror? The Curillian weapons began to glow. The air tensed. One wrong move and the fragile moment would break. Jax saw it. He felt the shift in atmosphere, the edge of panic in the air. His squad began to lift their rifles. Hold, Jax ordered, raising his hand. He took a step forward, slowly. The rain rolled off his helmet. The filtered atmosphere around him hissed softly. Then, in a single, deliberate motion, he reached up, and removed it. The toxic air licked at his skin. His suit's collar flared, generating a thin bubble of breathable air. But Jax didn't focus on the discomfort. He looked directly at Kale. Their eyes met, alien and human. And then, Jax spoke. Not in English. Not through a translator. But in the clicking, layered tones of the Curillian tongue. Vashta, he said. Friend. Safe. Kale froze. His antennae lifted in shock. His eyes searched Jax's face, blinking rapidly. The voice was rough. The accent imperfect. But the word was true. Behind him, the other Curillians murmured, confused. Kale raised a hand to silence them. He stepped forward slowly and looked at Jax again. Jax lowered his rifle to the ground. We're here to fight the Veer, he said softly. We're not your enemies. The words meant nothing to the Curillians, but the tone carried something ancient, something universal. Intention. Emotion. Memory. Kale turned to his warriors. After a moment of tense silence, he clicked a command. The violences lowered. The Curillians stepped back, creating a path toward the sanctuary entrance. Jax took a breath. Not of relief but of quiet understanding. He tapped his helmet. Team, he said over comms. We've made contact with friendlies. Hold fire. Hold formation. Establish perimeter. Nothing gets through. Behind him, his squad complied, spreading out like shadows, forming a silent barrier between the sanctuary and the storm beyond. From within the root heart, Elder Zyra watched. She saw the humans standing beside her own people not as invaders, but as protectors. And she felt something stir in her chest, something ancient and long buried. Hope. Above, in the storm-shrouded sky, more Reaper teams descended. The jungle roared with thunder. The Veer regrouped for a final assault. But now, the lines had been drawn. And for the first time in living memory, the Curillians were not alone. The storm grew louder. The jungle, wounded and burning, exhaled smoke into the sky. Veer forces, now aware of the unexpected human interference, began to regroup. From every direction, their dark shapes moved toward a single objective: the root heart sanctum. They had failed to anticipate resistance. Now, they were coming with everything. Inside the sanctuary, ancient walls pulsed with urgency. The rhythmic glow of biolights flickered faster, reacting to the change outside like a living heart sensing danger. Jax stood at the entrance, eyes scanning the tree line. His armor was splashed with mud and rain. His visor flickered with data overlays: enemy movement, terrain scans, time estimates. They're coming in waves, he said over comms. Reposition to secondaries. Prepare fallback kill zones. Curillian warriors gathered behind him, their bodies tense, violences in hand. Kale stood at his side, eyes locked on the horizon. There, he said, gesturing with his antennae. They gather in the ravine to the east. It's a choke point. If they breach it, then we make sure they don't, Jax replied. Through the trees, Major Petrova arrived with her command squad, scarred, soaked, but unshaken. Jax, she said flatly. Report. We've made contact. The Curillians are assisting. But the Veer are massing for a final push. Petrova turned toward the direction of the ravine, her visor reflecting green lightning. Too many to hold back by hand. She paused, just for a heartbeat. Then switched to the command channel. Silent Vigil, this is ground command. Requesting fire support. Coordinates uploaded. Target, ravine sector. Danger close. A brief silence. Then Admiral Thorne's voice, calm and final. Confirmed. Fire support inbound. All ground units, take cover. 5 seconds. In the jungle, everything stilled. Jax turned to Kale, urgently. Cover. Now. Warn your people. Kale clicked in alarm, waving his warriors down. And then, a beam of light pierced the clouds. Thin, white-hot, barely visible through the storm. Followed by something faster. Heavier. A tungsten rod, dropped from orbit, slammed into the ravine. No sound came at first. Just wind. Then the earth cracked. A controlled explosion detonated underground. Trees vanished. Rocks melted. The jungle floor rose then fell into silence. Where Veer units had been preparing their assault, now there was only a crater. Smoking. Empty. The blast shockwave pushed out like a ripple across the ground, stopping only meters from the sanctuary walls. Inside the root heart, Elder Zyra gripped the root-carved railing, her expression unreadable. Her people crouched beside her, stunned. That was not Veer, one of them whispered. No, she said. That was something else. Back on the battlefield, Petrova adjusted her helmet. Clean strike, she muttered. They won't regroup after that. But Jax wasn't done. He turned to the Curillians around him, some still wide-eyed, others rising with renewed purpose. We hold this ground together, he said, voice calm. We don't fall back. Not one step. Kale translated. The Curillians nodded. And so, for the first time in the history of Veridia, humans and Curillians fought as one. The Veer, stunned and scattered, still pressed forward, machine instincts demanding completion of their mission. But they didn't understand. The Curillians knew the terrain. They guided reapers through winding root tunnels, hidden ledges, overhanging canopies. The reapers brought the firepower, the tech, the precision. Together, they became a wall of purpose. Violences flashed through mist. EMP grenades sparked against cybernetic limbs. Acid shells detonated inside armored torsos. Reaper blades slashed through Veer metal. Curillian warriors screamed their war songs, ancient melodies that twisted through the rain. The sanctuary did not fall. Not today. And through it all, Zyra watched silent, breathless. Not with fear, but with the weight of something long forgotten. The feeling of being defended. The rain grew colder. Heavier. Like the sky itself was mourning the dead. But the battle was not over. Through the smoke and shattered jungle, something moved fast, direct, unstoppable. Apex Unit 7. Towering over the lesser Veer, it had once led countless extermination campaigns across alien worlds. Its body was an unholy fusion of armor and flesh. Cybernetic limbs pulsed with energy. Its spine glowed like molten wire beneath cracked plating. Its eyes, clustered and flickering, scanned the battlefield with predatory calm. And now, it had made a decision. Ignore the humans. Ignore the soldiers. Strike the heart. Kill the leader. Its limbs compressed like a coiled spring. Then it launched. Inside the sanctuary entrance, Elder Zyra had stepped forward. She stood in the open, her hands gently clasping the carved seed pod once given to a child. She was not a warrior. Not anymore. But she would not run. Behind her, Curillian civilians watched. Warriors knelt beside wounded. The sanctuary's last defenses flickered fading. And from the trees, Apex Unit 7 erupted, leaping straight for Zyra with terrifying speed. Its limbs tore through branches. Its weapon arm reconfigured mid-flight, forming a spear-like cannon charged with energy. It didn't hesitate. It didn't think. It aimed directly for her chest. Jax saw it too late. He was across the clearing, locked in a firefight when the sudden flicker on his HUD caught his eye. The trajectory. The timing. The target. Zyra no. Without thought, without plan, he ran. His legs pumped through the rain-soaked mud, his boots barely gripping the roots. His armor groaned with each step. His muscles screamed. But he didn't stop. Just before Apex reached Zyra, Jax threw himself into its path. They collided midair. Impact. Metal crashed against metal. Jax's body slammed into the monster's core. Both were thrown sideways into the mud, crashing through broken roots, tumbling into a shattered clearing. Jax groaned, pain lancing through his ribs. His visor cracked. His left arm barely responded. But Apex Unit 7 was already rising. Faster. Stronger. Unfeeling. It pinned Jax to the ground, pressing a massive knee into his chest. Its weapon arm hissed, locking into place, charging for a kill shot at point-blank range. Jax strained. His armor's servos whined under the pressure. Sparks flew from his chest plate. The cannon edge pressed closer, closer, until it hummed inches from his face. "You're not taking her," he snarled through clenched teeth. And then a flash of blue light. From behind, a violence tore through Apex's rear plating deep, right into the seam where armor met spine. The acidic payload exploded inside the monster's body. Apex Unit 7 screamed, not in pain, but in system failure. Its limbs spasmed violently, losing control. Kale stood behind it, gripping the lance, his expression fierce. "Not this time," he clicked. Jax seized the moment. He wrenched himself free, reached for the blade at his side, a monomolecular combat knife forged for one thing, piercing Veer cores. In one fluid, practiced motion, Jax plunged it upward right into Apex's sensor cluster. The blade pierced flesh, wire, and processor. Apex Unit 7 froze. Its compound eyes flickered. Then, darkness. It collapsed in the mud, lifeless. Jax staggered to his feet, panting. Mud clung to his armor. Blood mixed with rain. He turned to Kale, nodding. The Curillian returned the gesture. They had fought as one. Behind them, Zyra still stood untouched. Her eyes locked onto Jax's face. Something in them softened. Not awe. Not shock. Recognition. A memory, long buried, now returned. Around the battlefield, the remaining Veer, now without their leader, faltered. Their coordination unraveled. Their units fell back, confused, disconnected. The Reapers and Curillians pushed forward, methodically clearing the last drones. The battle was ending. And in the crater where a legend had fallen, a human and an alien stood together. Not as strangers, but as survivors. The rain had not stopped, but the war had. Smoke curled from shattered machines. Burnt leaves floated in black puddles. The jungle breathed again, uneven, cautious, alive. Jax stood apart from the others now, away from the Reaper squads clearing the field, away from the silent efficiency of cleanup. His helmet hung from his fingers. His armor was cracked, stained with battle. But in his eyes something soft remained. In front of him stood Elder Zyra, framed by the glowing archway of the root heart. Her gaze was not that of a survivor. It was the gaze of a witness. And she was looking at him like she had seen him before. Neither of them spoke at first. The wind moved softly through the broken trees. Then Jax reached down, and slowly opened a small compartment in his armor. He withdrew an object, old and carefully preserved. A seed pod. Brown and polished, carved with swirling patterns, each curve a story, each groove a memory. He held it out to her with quiet reverence. "This was given to me," he said gently. "A long time ago. By one of your people." Zyra's hands trembled as she took it. Her fingers traced the patterns. Her antennae lifted slowly. Her eyes, those vast, glass-like eyes, widened with recognition. "This is Neris's mark," she whispered. "He was my predecessor. A healer. He once spoke of a child, a soft-skinned creature he found among the trees. A broken thing, clinging to life. He saved it, when the stars had already turned their backs." She looked at Jax again. "That child was you." Jax nodded slowly. "He gave me this. I never forgot." "And now you've returned," Zyra said. "Not as a child, but as a blade. As thunder from the sky." She looked down at the seed pod again. "Why come back, after so long?" Jax's voice was quiet, firm. "Because Earth remembers its debts." A silence settled between them, not heavy, but sacred. Then, with great care, Zyra made a gesture, an ancient sign among her people. Her hand brushed over her chest, then extended toward him, fingers open like roots to the rain. A gesture that meant, "You are remembered. You are part of our story now. You came when no one else would." In orbit, aboard the silent Vigil, Admiral Thorne activated the wideband transmitter. He spoke a message that would drift through the stars, encrypted, untraceable, brief. "Decades ago, kindness was shown when none was expected. Earth remembers. The debt is paid." Then he ended the transmission. No flag. No credit. Only silence, and legacy. Back on Veridia, Jax stood beside Zyra and Kale, looking out over the battlefield. He saw human medics tending to both Reapers and Curillians. He saw wounded brought into the sanctuary. He saw supplies lowered gently, food, energy, healing gel, tools, but no weapons, no machines that would alter the balance. Just enough to help them rebuild. Not to owe Earth anything, but to remind them they weren't forgotten. "What happens now?" Kale asked, his voice quieter, wearier. Zyra turned toward the storm-clouded sky. "Now, we remember. The storm continued. Rain fell in gentle waves, washing the blood and ash into the jungle's hungry soil. The fires had burned out. The Veer were gone. But the silence they left behind remained. In the clearing beside the root heart, Reaper medics moved quietly through the aftermath. Wounded were stabilized. Curillian defenders were given nutrient packs. No questions. No commands. Only help, quiet, efficient, unseen. Supply crates marked with the subtle insignia of the UNS were stacked in a circle offering medicine, clean water, repair gel, solar cells, and nutrient spores. But there were no beacons. No transmitters. No demands. Nothing left behind that could tie Earth to this place. Inside the sanctuary, Jax stood once more with Zyra and Kale. He had removed his gloves. His hands, scarred and human, rested against the living walls. He spoke slowly, choosing his words with care. "We can't stay." "We know," Zyra replied. "Our orders, no witnesses, no records. No one can know what happened here. But we will remember," Kale said. "That's all that matters," Jax nodded. "The Veer won't come back. Not for a long time." He looked to the carved seed pod in Zyra's hands. "What happens next is yours to choose." Zyra gently placed a hand on his arm. Her touch was light, but the meaning was heavy. "You came when no one else did. That is written now, in the roots of our story." In the sky above, the silent vigil decloaked for the final time. Its engines glowed with silent light as stealth dropships descended one by one, hovering just above the jungle, barely disturbing the leaves. Reaper teams moved like shadows into extraction positions. No formation. No ceremony. They had arrived in silence. They would leave the same way. Major Petrova approached Jax. Her armor was scratched, the visor cracked, but her voice was steady. "Time to go, Sergeant." Jax nodded slowly. "One more minute." She studied him, then gave a quiet nod, turning away to handle final protocols. Jax turned to Zyra and Kale once more. "We broke a lot of rules coming here. Some rules are meant to be broken," Kale said, clicking softly. "Some debts," Zyra added, "are older than law." Jax smiled, a tired, honest smile. "Will others come looking for us?" "If they do," Zyra said, "they will find only trees, silence, and the memory of what happened." She placed a hand over her heart. "You will not be forgotten." Jax resettled his helmet. The hiss of the atmospheric filter flared once more. "Nor will you." With a final nod, he turned, and walked toward the ship's boarding ramp. The Reapers lifted off in formation, silent pods vanishing into the clouds. The Earth fleet above phased out into the black of space, jumping to faster-than-light escape vectors, leaving no trail behind. On the ground, the jungle began its slow healing. Roots grew. Leaves unfurled. The soil reclaimed its story. But the Curillians had changed. They stood taller now. Not because they had won, but because someone had cared enough to fight for them. Later that night, beneath the sheltering canopy of the root heart, Zyra stood alone. The carved seed pod rested in her hands, glowing softly in the biolight. Beside her, Kale stepped forward, his eyes turned toward the sky. "Do you think they'll ever come back?" Zyra looked up through the mist, through the storm to the stars. Perhaps. Perhaps not. She closed her fingers around the seed pod. But they've given us something more than protection. What? Kale asked. She smiled. The truth that we are not alone. And the knowledge that we were worth remembering. The lightning flashed one final time, illuminating the jungle in green fire. And then, the night held its breath once more. Not in fear, but in hope. And so, the battle on Veridia was won, but the story is far from over. The Curillians, once on the brink of extinction, now hold on to the knowledge that they are not alone in the universe. Earth, against all odds, came to their aid, not as conquerors, but as saviors bound by a shared debt. Sergeant Jax, a child saved long ago, returned the favor. With every strike, every sacrifice, he reminded us of the power of remembering. Of debts paid. Of alliances forged not by circumstance, but by honor. But this victory, though hard won, does not mark the end of the Veer threat. The galaxy is vast, and the forces of destruction are always moving. What happens next? What other worlds are out there, waiting to be remembered or forgotten? As we close this chapter, know that this is only the beginning. The Reapers may have saved Veridia, but their mission has only just begun. Who will they fight for next? And what new dangers will they face? The answers lie in the stars, waiting for us to explore. If you've enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon, so you don't miss out on more thrilling, untold adventures. We've only scratched the surface of what's out there in the galaxy, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, keep exploring. The universe is watching.